Yes, guys, I'm Si. Welcome to Cardiff City World. Welcome to Friday Night Live. And welcome back to the channel. We're just going to have a good old chit-chat, answer some questions. There's quite a lot to talk about, which is remarkable, really, because I talked about a load of stuff last night with Evan. And now I'm going to talk about a load of stuff with Aaron. But we had some good feedback to last Friday's show. So we brought Aaron back for another one. He got through his test. And now we're going to bring him back for the old second episode, and we'll see if he gets a full series then, isn't it? But I'm joined by acepodcastnation commercial manager and, of course, my good friend, Mr. Aaron Anderson. How are you, mate?
Good evening, Simon. I'm very well. It's been a very warm and busy day again, isn't it? How's yourself?
Yeah. Moving on. No, can't complain, I suppose, you know. It is what it is, isn't it? Stress is of stress. But, right. I got to dig in straight away, mate, right? Because there's a lot of stuff to talk about. I want to talk about Steve Borley. I want to talk about some bits and pieces. I want to talk about today's game behind closed doors. I want to talk about players having a bit of a U-turn. I want to talk about all sorts of stuff. But first of all, I'm going to answer Jamie's question, because I don't shy away from anything. So Jamie Gray says, Si, any reason you said you thought Willock would be gone by the end of the week when he's clearly not moving, close to moving at all? You said on the stream earlier this week. Yeah, it was just a feeling. It wasn't really based on anything that I'd heard, other than I'd heard that, like, he wasn't one of the sort of, how can I word it? Like, maybe like the ones who'd really impressed in Brian Barry Murphy's short time at the club. Not that he's done anything particularly wrong, but just one that maybe hadn't caught the eye. And then obviously he was with the 21s, and there was a bit of conflicting information about that, which is why I never really talked about it, because some people were saying that it was a disciplinary issue, but a lot of people were saying that it was just he needed minutes and he hadn't played on the weekend. So you got to take it at face value. And for me, if I can't, I'll generally only talk about stuff publicly if I hear it from like a couple of different people who I trust. I won't just go and just spout any old crap all over the place. So the Willock thing was an opinion rather than anything else. I'm still think he might leave before the start of the season, but again, just an opinion. I'll put you on a spot, Aaron. If you were the manager, if you were Brian Barry Murphy, would you keep Chris Willock for this season in League One?
It depends which version of Chris Willock you get. You know, he has all the abilities. Probably Cardiff City's current version to Josh Murphy, isn't he? Some games he can light up, and sometimes he gets really, really frustrating. In my opinion, I think the position that he currently plays, I think we've got better options there. I think we've got more exciting options than youngsters. I think that probably, you know, with a desire, heart, and probably potential, probably surpass him. I'm sure his wages is probably not one of the lower end of the scale. So if you had the opportunity to probably cash in into him, it would make sense, wasn't it?
Yeah, I actually think he's more of a 10 than a winger, but equally, I don't think he's done enough. And since he's come to Cardiff, I was really excited when we signed him. I thought it was a real clever signing. It just hasn't quite panned out, but there's still time. He's only been here 12 months. And as we always say on the shows, these players are human beings. They got families, they've got private lives. And sometimes maybe they take a bit of time to settle into the area, the kids settle into school, all these different aspects that go into a human being's life. So maybe we see a different version of Chris Willock this year. You don't know, and obviously we're dropping down a level. There'll be difficulties with that, but there'll also be benefits to dropping down a level in terms of the opposition and the quality of the defending and things like that. I actually think Chris Willock is one of them, mates, where if we sold him, depending on where he went, he could end up being like Josh Murphy, like go and do something really special. Like he's got the ability, but it is what it is, isn't it? Look, we're going to have to talk about the elephant in the room, mate. One of the board members took to Twitter last night, and look, right, everybody's human. It was quite late at night-ish, and, you know, as I said to you off air, right, sometimes when I am on Twitter, I try to avoid going on there, but sometimes I'm on Twitter, all the time when I'm on Twitter, I see people saying certain things, and I'm like, I know that's bullshit. And I want to just go jumping in and go, nah, that's crap. But I don't, and I can't for various reasons. Maybe to protect the person who's told me or whatever it may be. Well, it might be a sensitive subject. So, like, I do feel for Steve Borley in a way, because he's the only board member who's on social media, right? So he's the only point of contact for people who are angry, frustrated, worried about transfers, worried about takeovers, all these different things that, relegation, people are pissed off, right? And he's the one person that they can tag. So I'm sure his mentions, his DMs are horrifying. But if you go on to Twitter and you start quote tweeting people and saying stuff, make sure you're right, first and foremost, which he kind of wasn't with regards to the league, the squad size and stuff like that. And probably if you're a board member, just don't do it. There's no benefit to it. And that's what I always say to the people who do stuff for me is there's no benefit to getting into like a Twitter spat with someone or whatever it may be. Like, what was your opinion, mate? I don't know if you saw it in real time or if you sort of drawn attention to it afterwards. I feel for Steve in a lot of ways. He's done tremendous things for Cardiff City over the years, but I feel in this particular situation, he probably would have been better just not saying anything.
With everything that's going on around the club with, the rumours of takeovers, etc., I think it's quite a sensitive time for the club. And I think, the club are doing well just to sort of not really put anything in the press and out there. I think Steve's a great guy and he's given a lot to Cardiff City, and he's probably sort of driven a lot of the drives with training grounds, etc. But I think there has to be an element of professionalism. He's been a board member for a very long time, and there's a time where it's better to say nothing than something. And, as Cardiff City fans, live, die and breathe on every bit of information that we're given, and rightly so. It's more than a passion, it's our way of life. But you can't excuse false information or wrong information, whether that's coming from a fan or a board member. And at the end of the day, the fans want the best for the club. And they, we'd like to know, what we're sort of going for and achieving. And I think it gives you just that bit of false, it's just a false perception when you've got a board member who's giving incorrect information to fans, because it's, do you trust then that information, other information? And these are the people that we trust to lead our club and take it into the next direction. And that's the frustrating thing about it.
And I think the other side of it is right, is there's two ways to look at it as well. Like, you could take it as face value. He's just made a mistake or he's worded it wrong, and he knows the rule and stuff. But then the flip side of that is, like, have Cardiff City got a board who don't know the rules about the squad and the under 21s players and stuff like that? Because that in itself would be quite concerning. Like, if that was I'm not saying that is the case, but like that would be a concern, wouldn't it? If if the board or whoever didn't know or understand the rulings around numbers and stuff. Yeah, look, is a human being, mate. And like I said, like, the guy gets hundreds of notifications a day calling him every name under the sun. And I think he had probably had enough of it. Maybe, I don't know if he drinks or not. Maybe he'd had a glass of wine. He was relaxed and he thought he'd answer someone. And it kind of spiraled from there. Unfortunately, it's backfired, and it's just not a good look, is it? All around, ultimately, I suppose. It's just one of them.
And ultimately, he's a fan, isn't he? So he's going to have his opinion. Not all our opinions are correct, but we still believe in him.
Yeah, and I think, mate, do you know what? One of the most frustrating things about social media and Twitter in particular is that there's a lot of, how can I word this? There's a lot of information on there which is not correct, shall we say. Yes. And if you're in a position or that it to be incorrect, it can be very frustrating and it can be quite irritating. And then you kind of have got to make a decision whether you're going to dive headfirst and get into a big debate, or whether you're just going to kind of ignore it and move along with your day. But I don't know. I do feel for him in one way, but like on the other way, I just think, what on earth, what was he thinking? But look, we all make mistakes, so it's one of those ultimately, isn't it? So it's been quite a big debate, right, over this week in terms of we haven't brought any players in. Some of the noises out of the club have been like, oh, we're very happy with the squad and stuff like that. Brian Barry Murphy wanted to use the Spain trip to have a real good look at the team. So I had heard that he didn't only just want to look at them, from a training perspective and playing games and stuff like that. He also wanted to see them as a group, how they interacted, how they behaved away from training, and how they conducted themselves with each other away from training and stuff like that. Because, we've all been on football tour or cricket tour or all these rugby tour, whatever it may be. Like, you're a big group. And I think it would make sense for him to want to do those things as well as the football side. Like, you might pick out someone who's a potential leader. You maybe pick up someone's a bit quiet and they might need a bit of a nudge, a bit of confidence building, whatever it may be, all these little things that you can pick up on in that sort of atmosphere or situation. But obviously the fans, me included, we're 2 weeks away from the start of the season. Is it 2 or is it 3?
2.
A couple of weeks from the start of the season, we haven't signed the player. Is the squad good enough? So I'll put it to you this. This is my opinion on it. I think in a one-off game, this squad is good enough to win a football match in League One. I think there's enough quality there. There's enough creativity, etc. However, in a long slog of a League One season, 3 games a week, some weeks, with all the different competitions, I'm not sure it's robust enough. I'm not sure it's got enough depth. And then you've got the age of the squad on top of that. I think it is a concern. You need a couple. Why do you think we haven't seen those additions?
I think there's a multiple issues that have sort of happened here. I think the appointment of Brian was very delayed. I think that impacted it. I think that going on recent years and sort of what we're aware of is that the club had an intention to make a few club signings. I think Brian had a philosophy and a way that he wanted to implement his stamp on the squad, and I don't think they achieved what he was looking to do. So I think it's gone back to the drawing board. We're all fully aware that on that tour, I think Brian's been very impressed by some of the youngsters that have come through and probably didn't realise that there was that good a crop there. And I think you've seen where he's been bringing out further youngsters out to the training camps that it's probably given him a bit of food for thought. And also there's certain players that we're aware of that have impressed behind the scenes that they were looking to replace. So when you have those sort of, all that mixed into a bit of a cauldron, that he's probably actively, chopping and changing constantly. We are fully aware that there are a few signings in the background that have been almost completed but haven't been announced for whatever reason. But I think, I just think you to bring somebody into the group when you're trying to implement a certain stamp, a certain style, when you're on a training camp can be quite disruptive, especially with what you're trying to look at with, the youngsters. And I think any potential players, especially loan players, would have done a preseason camp at their club. And if they're coming from, bigger Premier League clubs, they don't really need to have that sort of training camp with ourselves as such. And, we've seen it happen with a few of the players that we've brought in from Man City over the seasons. I think, you're definitely going to see it ramp up this next week or so. But also, you've just hit the nail on the head. You think this squad, will win a few games. There's nothing saying the first couple of games they can actually, when does the transfer window close? There's
end of August, isn't it? I think first September.
It's not ideal to have no one in through the door, but considering the players we've brought back, there are a few fresh faces around the team. We've got a fresh manager around the club, so it does have an almost a new feel to it as such. But I think those competitive games are really going to tell Brian exactly where he is and what he needs.
Yeah, so I agree with everything you just said, right? But I I guess, question or my query with it is that when Brian Barry Murphy did his interview for the managerial position, the same interview which kind of catapulted him into the conversation after probably starting off as a bit of an outsider, that interview is what kind of got him through the door, if you like. And one of the things I had heard about that interview was that his knowledge of the club and the players, within the squad, how he would use them, etc. That had kind of impressed. He was clearly very well prepared and had an idea of what he was going to do. But I also think like these guys, and I think it was Henry had said on Twitter the other day, like football people, they just obsessed with it. Like that's all they think about. And I can't help but think that when he came, by the time he started the Cardiff City manager's job, he would have had a list in his head of players that he'd like to bring in, or at least a profile of player that he'd like to bring in. He would have been aware of certain areas that he would have wanted to improve or strengthen. And there's a bit of a disconnect then when I think like that. And then I think, weeks later, we still haven't brought in anyone. Like that's a bit puzzling to me, shall we say? But I accept that he would have wanted to give everyone a fair, a fresh start and a fair crack at the whip. And you are right, like loans from Premier League clubs, they always tend to be late in the window because a lot of them go on pre-season tour to America or Malaysia or wherever the Premier League clubs go, and then they'll go out on their loan after they get back because their Premier League clubs will have a little bit of a look at them and stuff. So. I do understand it. Interestingly, by the way, just to throw a name out there, not that we've been linked with, but someone who I said that I'd be very happy if we signed. It was reported today that Harry Amas from Manchester United is going out on loan this season. He's a left back and a very, very good one at that. He played a bit of Premier League football at the end of last season, did quite well, but they want him to go out on loan and effectively get battered about a bit in it and get used to the men's game. He is someone who I think if you put him in the left back conversation for Cardiff City, straight away you are improving the first 11 and you're making the squads a lot stronger. Now, that's not to say I think we'll get him because I think he might go to a championship club maybe, but those sorts of players now will become available in this next 2-week period or this next sort of month, really, before the window closes. Premier League clubs will start to move out their youngsters for loans. And that's when you want Brian Barry Murphy, I guess, to use his contacts with Manchester City and Premier League development sides to bring in some real quality.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, obviously, when Brian, like you've touched on it there, when Brian had his interview, the club would have been fully aware of his expectations and what he intends to bring in, and they fully supported that. It's just the time frame that's sort of impacting that, but we don't know what factors are impacting that as well around the club or outside of the club. So there could be an answer for that lying somewhere there.
Yeah, and I guess that's the it. And so talking about a disconnect, this is another disconnect, right? So I think a lot of fans are putting 2 and 2 together and coming up with 4 and saying, well, the delay in the transfers coming in and out, because it's outs as well, is because there's discussions around a takeover and stuff. But then if you listen to the noises coming out of the club and local journalists, there's no takeover, or certainly not one that's in process. So there's a disconnect there between, well, if that's the case, then why has there been no sign-ins, or why are we not looking like close to sign-ins? So I understand people's frustration and I understand people's anxiety towards it. But I do feel like for the last 2 or 3 weeks I've been saying there's a couple ready to come in. They're going to come in, and I've got bored of saying it, because I've said it, I think, at least 2 weeks in a row. I think this week we'll see a couple come in, and they haven't come. So, ultimately, I'm going to stop saying it because I don't know, but they got to come in at some point. No, surely we won't go into this season without signing anyone.
No, I think nothing new from the club though, is there, with lack of noise?
Communication is key. We hear you. it is fascinating, isn't it? It is just fascinating, like how it's all kind of playing out and whatnot. Look, I don't think we need loads. I think I have heard, should I say, that the manager wants a left back, a centre back, a centre midfielder, and a winger. So what's that? 4? I think that's about right. If you're really, really greedy, you could maybe have a right back as well. But ultimately, I think if they're clever, they'll sign a full back who can play both sides. Because I think Will Spears has thrown a spanner in the works, hasn't he, by impressing in pre-season to the extent where I think they probably would have loaned him out, and now they're like, oh, actually, he could do a job. Like, he's a very talented boy, man. He is a very, very talented boy. Where do you stand on the fullback position? So, as we are now, we have Joel Bagan, who's I would count as a young but experienced footballer. He's played a good amount of first team football. I think he was quite consistent last year without being groundbreaking. You have then Louis Giles, who's played 1 or 2 senior appearances, highly rated, technically a very good footballer. Probably needs a loan just to maybe play a bit of men's football lower down and whatnot, but who knows? And then on the other side, you've got Ronan Pacquiao coming off the back of a serious injury, hasn't played a lot of senior football, but is, highly rated, aggressive, pacey. And Will Spears, who has never played a first team game or competitive first team game. And then you've got Perry NG injured. So again, I'll put it to you. If you were the manager, how many, if any, fullbacks would you want to bring in?
I think the greatest thing about, I know defensively we haven't been great last season, but I think there's a lot of options there. I think you've got lots of different sort of styles of players, and you've also got players who can cover a magnitude of positions. And you also got to think Lawler can play it right back as well. That, if you're asking me, I think should be the starting right back, to be fair. I think it just gives us an aggressive option from that position. I would personally invest in a left back. I'm a big fan of Joe Bagan. I think, the Bagan of old. I think if you can get that sort of a player on a front foot, I think you've got a player on your hands. But I think City spent too much time on the back foot last year, and he did sort of get found out. But, when they moved him into that central role, I thought he played really well. Defensively, he was very strong there. And I think with the right sort of wiser head inside him, just sort of guiding him, I think, I don't think he's a bad player, and I think, natural ability, I think he has it there. So, I'm not too worried about those fullback options, to be fair. I think there's enough options. It's just trying to keep them fit. I would be more invested in trying to recruit further up the field, in my opinion.
Okay. So when you say further up, do you mean in attacking options, yeah?
Yeah, I'd love, I think, Salek's obviously our starting forward, but I'd love to see someone with a bit of pace, something raw, something young. I'd love to see it.
Do you think Isaac Davis could be that guy?
Yes, I think he's got many attributes I'd like to see, but I just like a fox in the box. I'd like someone like a chopper, someone we could just bring in, someone young enough that, he's happy to play 15, 20 minutes here or there, sort of, run his balls off and just put him on the end of there. And if we are chasing a game, you can have the old sort of partnership of a Salek and another guy. I think, Isaac Davis plays better when he's playing off that sort of role. I know he can work along the front three, but my favourite position for him is just off that. I'd love to see just another winger that a bit more inside of a winger, has that natural ability. I think we've got wingers and can sort of hit the touch line, and I just love to see somebody that has that natural ability just to come in and just, I think we're going to be a force in that sort of 18-yard area. But I don't think the years have gone by when Cardiff City needs to invest in magnitude of players. We now need to invest in the right quality of player. And we don't need 6 or 7 signings. We probably need 2 or 3, maybe 4 quality signings. And I think that's what we need to sort of aim for. And I think Brian Barry Murphy's a very technical, a methodical coach. And it tells you everything he expects from his players. And, no offense to a Ryan Wintle and that, but if you can upgrade that and get someone of I'm not saying we sign him, but a Tommy Doyle sort of player, sort of gives you the sort of style of player that we're looking for. I think we just need to invest in a little bit more of that ability as opposed to the other element of it.
On that fox in the box that you mentioned there, mate, is that not Callum Robinson's role to run around and press and get those goals? I'm not saying whether he can always do that for whatever reason, but isn't that supposed to be his role?
Absolutely, it's meant to be his role, but we can sit here now and say how many games are we going to get out of Callum this year? His goals to game ratio tends to be half decent, but you've got to think the salary, the age, the standard of football is a lot more. He's going to receive a lot more kicks, and I just don't think that if you ask Callum to play between the 6 yard and the penalty spot, it's something he could do every game. I just think you need someone with just a lot of rawness that's just very eager, very keen, and just that ability just to be in the right place at the right time, and I think Salek will draw a lot of the hype and that, and rightly so, but I just think if you can get somebody there from a Premier League club that's just got that natural ability just to get on the end of it, I think it's going to be the difference this season. But I just don't think with what we pay Callum Robinson that would be his style and his way of playing. You watch him last season, he drops deeper and deeper and he tries to create a lot more things, and I know City should be on the front foot, but I just don't think it suits his game. And when you bring Callum Robinson into that, you start to lose players like Isaac Davis and Ruben Colwell, because through his eagerness to try and win the ball and create something, it just takes other people out of the game. And we're trying to make that pitch as big as possible this season.
Yeah, and I think it's all opinions, I suppose, isn't it, with regards to players. And I think most people agree that Callum Robinson on his day has got it. But unfortunately, whether it's fitness or whether it's that he's a bit streaky, it's like those periods when he's not scoring. Does he still do the pressing? Does he still run the channels and that sort of stuff? He's got to. He's like, ultimately, if that's his role, he's certainly got the ability to do it. It's just whether he can stay fit and to do it. It's interesting because I think there's been a few youngsters on the tour and pre-season so far who've done their cases no harm. I think Will Spears is obviously one we mentioned. I thought Louis Giles did all right the other day as well. I thought there was a big improvement in his physical dueling and stuff like that. But I also accept some people didn't like that, like Brian Barry Murphy was coaching him during the game. They sort of saw that as a weakness on Giles's part, which actually I saw it more as a positive on Brian Barry Murphy's part, that he was, he was saying to him, hold, press, whenever, because it's new. It's a new manager, new way of playing. We haven't pressed over the last couple of years. So when Louis Giles has been in the first team, he probably has been told to hold his position and be compact. So it is a new kind of way of playing. Just looking at some of the comments, right? There was there's a couple of people talking about Ethan Howworth. Do you think we need a keep, or do you think, not that we need a keeper because we talked about that last week, but do you think we will sell either of our keepers? I think Ethan Howworth will stay, and I think Ethan Howworth will start the season as our number one. But it's just an opinion.
I would agree. You're looking at the form of pre-season. I think his shot stopping's been much better. I know there's been some issues with distribution and just how Brian's been working along with him just to try and get the tempo and what he's actually looking for from a goalkeeper. I know the initial approach was that they were going to look to recruit a new keeper and they were looking at a youngster. I think with this now, especially with also Jack is now the disabled supporters
ambassador.
So that would say he's staying.
Yeah.
I don't think City are getting the sort of interest they probably wanted for certain players, which sort of rules out some sales. But I can't say that Hovart's done anything to deserve to be got rid of. And in reality, he's not a bad keeper. He's just his distribution's not all there. But for shot stopping, he's you'd expect him to be top 5 or 6 in that league. So would I be concerned having him in goals for the start of the season? No. But I would like to see somebody else coming in. I think Jack's decent in his own right, but I still don't think he has that ability of what Brian would be looking for as well. And it's a very strange one because you're finding, especially at this level, you're sacrificing a certain strength of a goalkeeper to accommodate the kicking, i.e. the Ryan Alsops of the game. You know, being a goalkeeper myself, I can tell you now, shot stopping and keeping the ball out of the net was the most important thing.
Yeah.
And
most managers, when they come into a team, though, they always look to bring their own keeper in, don't they? I think it's quite common. And equally, I think one of the other reasons I'd like to see us bring another keeper in is I would like to see Ben Turner go out on loan and actually play some football, because unfortunately for him, in many ways, he didn't play much football at all last year because he wasn't with the 21s, because he's with the first team. And he was either on the bench as the backup keeper when one of the others had an injury, or he was traveling as the third keeper in case of an injury. So he ended up not playing a great deal of football. And I think the age he's at now, he could really benefit from a loan.
Yeah.
And particularly, you know, if Brian Barry Murphy is looking to bring in a keeper, then that makes sense. From what I've heard, keeper wasn't on the list, or certainly the list that I had the other day of positions. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how it all goes. Another thing was Sav said here that BBM appears to favour Mafiko at left back. So we mentioned youngsters who did well in the pre-season or in the trip to Spain. I thought Mafiko struggled a little bit. I got to be honest. I didn't think he was as effective as some of the other fullbacks. Now, not to say he was terrible, by the way, just that I've seen him play for the 21s and look a lot better, look a lot more accomplished and better with his passing. Now, that could be anything, could be nerves, could be the heat, you know, could be whatever. But I'd be concerned if, you know, first game of the season on those performances, if Mafiko was the first choice left back, certainly because Joe Bagan was so consistent last season. What did you make of Mafiko? Because he's an exciting young player, but
what I like is that what BBM's actually doing, he's actually giving people a platform. You know, it would have been easy enough that when he didn't have the greatest of games out there, like you said, but he was given the opportunity to carry on. So he's, the greatest time that you can coach a player is actually during a game, because it's a live situation, and I think you'll learn from it. And there's nothing worse than, especially during a preseason game, when the reality is there's not much riding on it, but it's an opportunity to show that you get pulled off, you get hooked, and then all of a sudden your confidence hits you and your head's gone, especially for a youngster. So I think he's been managed well. If he doesn't make the sort of starting cut as such, for the season, at least there's an expectation, he's achieved a preseason. They can look at loans, they can look at putting him back in the 21s. But he is an exciting player. But the step up from the 23s to the first team would be massive. You've also got to take into consideration it's a completely different style of football. We know firsthand that there are other players in that squad not struggling, but learning with the new expectations, how much they've got to run, what the expectations of their position should be and where they should be at all times. And we're talking about a youngster that's still learning his trade, but has to pick up on that, and he is an exciting player, and I think when we've looked at other players as well, this will be the sort of test in times, and it'll show if they've got the sort of the natural ability to survive at Cardiff City, because that's what this season's going to be about. It's from the expectations of what the gaffer's saying is that, can you survive, and can you thrive in my environment? So let's give that kid the opportunity, and preseason's probably the best time to be doing it, isn't it? Especially, the flexibility of looking at the teams he's selecting recently, and people are playing pretty much all over, aren't they? And then everyone's playing in the spots that they normally play is the best way to describe it.
Yeah, and I think, like I think I've said a couple of times, all these talented academy graduates, right? All the people coming through the 18s, the 21s, if they get their first team opportunities under Brian Barry Murphy, which is probably quite likely because he likes to do that. He likes to bring young players through and then develop them. Some of them will thrive in that first team atmosphere and they will take it to like a duck to water. And some of them will, maybe not. You might not be the ones that you expect to go and kick on and do really well in the first team. They might it suits them. And then there'll be others which struggle with it a little bit. There'll be some that sink and just cannot cope with the pressure, or they can't deal with the physicality or whatever it may be. because everybody's different, right? And everyone develops differently.
Yeah.
Now, I want to make it clear, like, I wasn't saying that Mafiko was terrible or anything like that. I was just saying that I thought, compared to when I've seen him before, he didn't look as comfortable. But I also think he's a technically very good footballer. So I think, he's certainly one to keep an eye on. There's a few like that. I think Troy Perrott is knocking around the first team, and I wouldn't be shocked to see him get some game time this year. I think he's another. Go on.
Sorry. What's very exciting as well is that it also shows us the style of fullback that BBM wants.
Yeah, he wants attacking fullbacks. Yeah,
it's very exciting. It reminds you of the sort of Cody Dramas of the world. Aggressive, in your face, and if we can get a youngster doing it, I think that's fantastic. And it'll be a great advocate for Cardiff City going forward, won't it? Just to be able to see one of our own as such again, in that sort of role, marauding down the wings and getting past our wingers. That's the Cardiff City of old. That's Dave Jones eras.
Yeah, it's and that was what actually interested me. One of the tactical little things that interested me during those preseason games, or those first couple of games, was the right back was going quite high and wide, and like you rightly said, they're trying to make the pitch as big as possible. Joel Bagan slotting in, inverting into the midfield, creating those little triangles and those little overloads in the sort of inside left area, and it's really clever. And then, when Joel or when Louis Giles was on and he was a bit higher and wider, either Spears or I think it was Spears, it might be Kipakio, but they were sort of inverting on that side. I think it's a really clever way to play. And if you can get those young players to understand their role in that. So the way I always look at it is these young players, they don't have to understand everybody's role in the team. They only have to understand their own. Obviously, they're going to have a rough idea of what other people are doing. I get that. But if they understand their own role exactly, that's an environment where they're going to thrive. And everything that we know about Brian Barry Murphy, obviously, we've got to wait and see, and we've got to see how it all pans out in practice. But everything we know about him is that he thrives working with young players, developing them, and bringing them into a first-team environment where they not only, make a debut and then sit on the bench all season, they go on, kick on, and, do well throughout that season. So, I find it difficult to not be excited by that side of it, the young players particularly. But I also think there's a few players. Look, we've got to be honest. Yeah, and I think if I'm being completely honest, there is a couple of players in this squad that probably need to be moved on. Keona Tete, I think, has got to be moved on. But as you correctly said earlier, it's all very well wanting to move a player on, but if you do not have a club to sell them to or loan them to, that's a problem. Doesn't matter how good you are at negotiations. You could be good, you could be bad. If you've got no one to negotiate with, it don't really matter. And I think in Atete's case, he's clearly got some level of technical ability because he came through Spurs' academy, so he's going to have been, decent. We haven't seen it at Cardiff City. I think it was an absolute crazy decision to give him a new contract last year to then send him on loan. I cannot see the benefit of that in the short or long term. And I will always criticize it because that was just a bizarre decision. He could have left this summer being out contract, and then we wouldn't be in this predicament of trying to move him on. I don't really see him fitting in the squad and the way that Brian Barry Murphy wants to play. And I also think that there's at least 3 players in front of him if you had to pick the kind of pecking order, if you like. Where do you stand on Keona Tete and also just generally trying to sell players?
I think the problem you've got is that, unless a player asks for a transfer request, they're entitled to the remainder of their wages in that contract. So you could be moving players on and you're still owing them quite a bit of a salary as such. So you've got to be very wise. I think City have made mistakes with offering, like you said, people new contracts, etc. But with that, they've got to be a bit more wise. They've got to be a bit more smarter. And I think the lack of interest in certain players is evident, as such. But it's also, what you replace it with. I know we're looking at decreasing our squad size, but you don't want to be left without too many options up front. So you have that, the ability with. I don't think Keon's the greatest of centre forwards, but he's there's something definitely wrong if he's not a second or third choice in League One, is he? And I know his stint at Bolton wasn't the greatest, but you need. It's great getting rid of him, but if you haven't got somebody to fulfil that role, then you sort of, you're penalising yourself as a club, and that's all around the pitch. At 6, that's another option. People like Wintle, it's the same sort of problem there. Eli King's done very well over pre-season. Joel's there. Ruben's been looked at 6, but 3 players that are clearly ahead of Ryan. But then if you can't offload him, there's another problem. And it seems like it's a Cardiff City thing, isn't it? That there's players that are clearly not good enough, and if you had the ability to get rid of them tomorrow, you probably would. But it's what you bring in behind it. And I think when we sat there and spoke earlier about things that are impacting transfers, etc., I think these are the sort of decisions that are probably frustrating the club, for that.
But then, if we play one up front, which I suppose if you did percentages, we're most likely to play one up front, generally speaking. Salic is going to be your first choice.
Agreed.
And then it's going to be probably Callum Robinson, I think, or maybe Isaac Davis. I don't know where the manager stands on those two. But you'd imagine both of those are in front of Atete.
Agreed.
And then I just think, you've also got, in an emergency, you could play Kean Ashford there. You could play Ruben Colwell as a false 9. They all feel like better options, with the greatest of respect. It's not personal, and I don't mean to dig the guy out, but we haven't seen the best of him in a Cardiff City shirt, let's say. He didn't have a great time at Bolton. And maybe back at Cardiff now, under Brian Barry Murphy is going to work some miracles with certain players, and we'll see a different player. I'm not confident in that, but you never know.
And you've also got to take into consideration, I think Salak is that sort of, he's got all the attributes of sort of a target man holding that ability up. And I think, you're rightly so what you said, who are the options are, in front of him. But if you ask an Ashford, an Isaac Davis and that to be that person to hold up the ball, it's not going to happen. And that's my sort of concern because, especially in the sort of lower leagues, I know there's a lot of teams that like to play football.
Sorry, mate, just to interrupt you, but can Kean Atete hold the ball up any better than Isaac Davis or Callum Robinson? Absolutely not.
It's just the profile of player. And I think that's the problem,
And I would also argue that our best football last year came when, in terms of, I can't think of the word. I was going to say synchronicity, but I don't think that's a word. In terms of just general balance, we looked best when Callum Robinson was running the channels, running in behind and making the pitch big, and that created room for your Robertsons and your Colwells and your wingers to do more sort of creative work. So it's interesting. I wanted to, I think it was Cameron asked the question. So he said, Simon, is there any truth to the Grant Hanley signing? So I did a recruitment report on Grant Hanley this morning. If you want to watch it, check it out. My understanding with that is a few people sent me his name yesterday saying, we're signing Grant Hanley. And then I also had a few people sending me Jonathan Tompkinson from Norwich, both centre-backs. One's 23. Grant Hanley's obviously older and slower. There was a big debate in the live chat last night about Grant Hanley. And even in the video I did earlier, which you can check out, it's very much like the leadership side, the experience side, the aerial duels, the set pieces, that's all ticks. But the recovery pace and the pace and the mobility is maybe a big concern. So you'd have to get the right players around it for sure. But I want to clarify that on both of those players, I sent both their names to the people who I speak to or I really trust. And I if they tell me something, then it's happening. And I take it to the bank and none of them would confirm either name. So for me, I would take it with a pinch of salt in that case. because I can't confirm the names. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not coming in, one or the other, or both, or whatever, because last season, Cardiff did people forget, last summer, Cardiff did a very good job of keeping their signings quiet until they announced them. And I think I even praised them on a show, even though it was like, it's frustrating for someone like me who talks about Cardiff every day. You want the leaks, you want the names, you want the rumours, but we did a good job of keeping them relatively quiet last year. Maybe they're doing that this year, maybe they're not. I don't know. But Grant, right, there we are. Let me put that to you, mate. Grant Hanley, would you think that's an intelligent signing? Do you worry about his speed and his mobility? Like, where would you stand on that as a signing?
I'm very much on the fence, to be fair. I think, you're looking at the young, the Lawlers, the Fishes in the squad. I think his experience and the level he's played at, I think, would be a great education. If he had a Will Fish, for example, alongside him, there is no substitute for pace, absolutely. You're right in that sense, but then there's also no substitute for experience, is there? And I think there's a lot, a lot can be sort of said for that experience element. And I would love him around the club, but I wouldn't assume he'd come here on a low wage. I don't think he would come here not to play football. So there'll be an expectation of games, So when you add those two together, there's probably going to be better options out there. I just like the way
free transfer.
Yeah, I just like I like the ability. I like people learning from people, and I think experience, would be a thing. And the reality is, if we're, where we should be at the end of the season, contemplating promotion, etc. He has been in and around there with Norwich, hasn't he? He's experienced that. He's tasted those sort of fruits. So still on the fence, mate. I couldn't give you a. Would I be happy or not? Because I just don't know on that one.
Yes, I'm very much the same, mate. So the other guy, Jonathan Tompkins, and I'm going to do a recruitment report on him. I think probably tomorrow or Sunday. I haven't quite decided when, but it'll be over the weekend. But just had a little look earlier, and I was speaking to someone who's a bit more familiar with him, and they said he's very, very good on the ball. He's 23, so you've got like that resale value. Although, as a fan, I couldn't give a shit about resale value. Like, I want to know if he's going to improve the football team and if he's, good enough to play the way Brian Barry Murphy wants to play, and can he defend? So, sometimes stats can be deceptive in terms of one of the first things you notice about him is he hasn't played a lot of football in recent years, like a handful of games. But that can be deceptive sometimes. There can be reasons for that. By all accounts, the little that I've seen of him at the moment, he seems to be very good on the ball. He's young. He's mobile. He's very quick for a big lad as well, which is obviously the flip side of Grant Hanley. But we just don't know. So as doing what I do and creating content about Cardiff, we'll have a look and we'll give an opinion. But I don't think, and I had this conversation with someone the other day, right? I don't think we need a centre-back, I agree. But I don't think we have to bring in a centre-back who's 32. Like, you don't have to bring in someone who's mid-30s to bring experience or leadership to the group. Leaders can be at any age. Experience, you could have a 23-year-old, 24-year-old who's got bags of experience. It's about the personality and it's about the mentality. And I think that's going to be more important in terms of the impact it has on the group. But I think Grant Hanley's assets in terms of his personality, his leadership, his captaincy, all of that side of it, I think would be perfect for what we have in 3 centre-backs under 25 in Darland, Fish and Lawler. Now, you can debate whether all 3 of them will still be here at the start of the season. That's fine. But they're all relatively young, inexperienced, whatever. But then you've also got Callum Chambers. So I noticed earlier when you were talking about the fullback situation, and people in the chat noticed as well, you didn't mention a centre-back. You went to the attacking side of things. Do you think we need a centre-back, or are you happy with the kind of 3 guys under 25 and Callum Chambers being the kind of 4 that are going to battle it out?
In my opinion, I would love to see a Will Fish and a Dylan Lawler centre-half partnership. I think that would be a dream for myself, However, I have to be wise. I think Callum Chambers, and I've seen that, and I think I said it last week, under Ramsey, he was that sort of dog we needed in those past couple of games, and I think he has that natural ability when he just decides to. I don't think his passing game is the greatest, but I think he wins most of the duels. He gets himself stuck in. He does the dirty side of the game that I like, and he gives that. He hasn't got the pace. He's another Grant Hanley in that element, but he is on a pretty penny. That's the problem. But if there's no suitors, why would you look elsewhere when you've got that at the club? Callum Chambers, his record speaks for itself, and he didn't have the greatest of seasons last year, but he's definitely an asset to Cardiff City, and he's definitely someone that will do what the gaffer needs. And I think with the record he has and the clubs he's played at, with what Brian's probably trying to get into that defensive unit, he should be taken on board. So, in my opinion, him alongside a Fish, I think, would be the sensible choice for this, especially the start of the season. But not the one I want. I'd love to have the younger two, but, I think, and you could even incorporate it as a back three. But, yeah.
So I've got a theory. It's not based on any sort of, information. It's based purely on the fact that I'm a right tactical nerd, and I just like thinking about football, right? Turn your light on, indeed. I have a theory, right? So at right back, we have a small issue in terms of Periengi's not going to be fit. They have to look after Pacquiao in terms of his load. And it would be a big ask of Spears to suddenly be a first-team player straight away. You've got to give him time. So what about if we saw a Will Fish or a Callum Chambers play at right back? Now, bear with me. So Will Fish has done it before when he was younger. Callum Chambers doesn't want to play right back. So let's say Will Fish is the right back. Chambers and Lawler are your centre backs. So it is a back four, but in possession, they become a back three. The left back goes and does his thing. And instead of the right back, overlapping on the right, he just inverts and becomes part of a back three or into the midfield. Callum Chambers, by the way, could push perfectly into midfield in that role, having played at midfield last year. So where there's been some talk that they've worked on a back three in training as well as a back four. Now that could just be for flexibility purposes, but could you see a scenario where, and we've seen, funny enough, Manchester City use that a lot by playing a centre back at right back, and then in possession, the whole shape sort of changes and they all kind of, do a different thing. Could you see that Brian Barry Murphy doing something as drastic as, not drastic, but creative, I guess, as that, of where, we don't need a right back because I'm going to play a centre back at right back and we're going to all shift along and do something different.
He's got that Pep schooling, haven't he? I think he's got, from having conversations with Brian, I think what I've taken on board is there's a way he's going to play. There's an expectation of how he plays, and Cardiff City will be better for it, but he won't sort of revert. Obviously, he'll have options, plan A's and plan B's and C's. But what you'll see Cardiff City will be instilled from that. This is the style of football. This is, fans have been calling for an identity, and I think he has been behind the scenes trying to push this. And every player, will have their expectations of this is what your role is and this is how you do it. It's great, having that flexibility and putting certain players in other positions. But I think predominantly he's going to want to play the players where where they're strongest at, because I think to achieve what he's looking to achieve is going to be, as a manager, I think it's going to be a bit of a battle, because you're expecting a lot, and the margins are going to be very, very fine from what he will allow. But it's great on the other side of it that we have that ability. When you start creating overloads and you have that flexibility, you've seen it last season with some of the players that were playing in very strange positions. But we can do that, and I think if you look at the squad as well, we have got that ability where I don't think people would say no anymore. I think long gone are the days where certain Cardiff City players would refuse to play a role, or I think everyone seems to be buying into what the manager's asking of. And, we both had the conversation off air that players are now actually changing their tune and wanting to represent Cardiff City this season, which, only bodes well for us and for Brian Barry Murphy.
So, obviously, you've had a couple of conversations with him. Give us a bit of an insight into what he's like in terms of his personality, his overall feeling, initial impressions of the guy.
Very, very enthusiastic, wanting to help. He's a gentleman that he just doesn't want to have the best on the pitch. He wants the best around the club. He wants to buy into everything. He's very keen to understand the club, the city, the history, the passion. He wants to represent the fans. And I can tell you now that the last time I've seen as much enthusiasm as this was probably under Neil Warnock and Malcolm Mackay. He's very keen to get us back where we belong. And also from the conversation that we had, he opened up about he feels privileged to be here, and that's great to hear and great to see. Not many people come across like that. And when you sort of you speak to certain people, especially football managers and football players, there's an element you can tell that they don't really want to give you their time. He couldn't help, but he was very infectious. He wanted to invest his time and have that conversation. And I know Cardiff City are going to be announcing some things across the season that Brian Barry Murphy will be doing, and it just sort of bodes well for the type of person he is, not just the manager he is. And I think if you've got someone like that at the helm of the club, you can only succeed. And we're hearing this stuff on the training ground as well. And it seems to be rubbing well off the players. Even the players that we know are quite difficult seem to be buying in exactly what he's trying to do. So, yeah. My opinion off season was that who was Brian Barry Murphy, and was he the right man for Cardiff City?
Well, I know I'm sure you wouldn't mind me saying, but when he was initially employed, you were a bit like, oh, I'm not sure about this. Obviously, me and you had talked about it because I had done a few videos on him and stuff like that. But I think it was very clear to me, at least, that your opinion seemed to change quite soon after he was appointed, just by things that you were hearing and seeing. Like there is a feeling of excitement at the club under Brian Barry Murphy. Like, take all the noise that you hear on social media and everything. You speak to people at the club, you speak to people in and around that team, and there is an excitement about it. And I kind of wanted to finish off on that, really, was that I was speaking to someone today, and they were telling me about Ruben, right? And they were saying, and last year, this person was quite critical of Ruben, not in a nasty way, just that he's capable of so much better. He should be more consistent, that type of stuff. Nothing that we don't hear week in, week out. And he was telling me that since he's come back in this summer, he described him as an absolute monster. He said he's bigger, he's a yard faster, he's working harder, he's more aggressive, he's moving the ball quicker. He said everything that you think maybe he could improve, he's improved. And this was coming from this guy who works with him day in, day out. And I was like, wow, that's exciting to hear. And it was just the way that he was talking about like the atmosphere within the squad in terms of like the togetherness, because togetherness is something that was criticized a lot by me last year. Like, they looked like a bunch of strangers. They didn't look like a team who was fighting for each other. Rightly or wrongly, that's what I thought, from the outside. And already that seems to have been addressed. And that might be naturally, or it might have been a thing which Brian Barry Murphy did. And on that, I think a few people have been discussing over the last couple of days, some of the players who asked to leave or asked for bids to be considered have done a full U-turn and asked to stay. So it's a bit like, there's definitely what I'm saying is there's a big positive atmosphere within the group. Now, you lose the first 4 games, that can change quickly. As football, we know that. Do you feel that positivity around the team, and do you feel it in the club as well? Because you go on social media and it's all doom and gloom, isn't it?
Absolutely, I think there's a lot of positivity. I think I said having conversations with Brian and people around the club, there's an expectation, there's a level, but he's also an honest, hardworking man. I think the first thing he did was when he got those players into a team meeting was sort of clear the air, gave them the floor. They provided feedback on how the season went and what they were looking at and improving, and he brought his ideas to that. I think he's a proper a player's manager in that sense. He's the sort of guy that will push you and help you grow. And I think he won't. Everything that Cardiff City, we were very critical of it last year when we had previous managers coming out in the press criticizing players, etc. I don't feel like we're going to have that under Brian. And also, Ruben's a very good testament that Ruben's come back this year, and even in the short games in pre-season, you can see Brian's working wonders with him, and you can see there's a clear path with certain players and clear projects, and that's not just there. It's across the field, and I think every player has to buy into a story, and every player has to buy into their purpose for this club and a dream of like where they see themselves, whether that's a picture in the paper for a promotion or scoring the winning goal in a cup final, etc. And I think from speaking to him, I couldn't help but buy into his sort of ethos and how he wanted to, to sort of create a Cardiff City vision. And it was not just the vision on the pitch; it was the vision in the stands. It was a vision around the club. And he's very infectious, and I think Cardiff City should be doing more to sort of let the fans have that access and see it and to hear it, because that's what we need. And I think this season, even if we do go on a spell of losing a couple of games, there's just something about Brian Barry Murphy that gives me confidence. There's something called change about that, and I can see that within the squad as well. And it almost feels like we didn't have it last year, until Ramsey came in, where players would not put their bodies on the line. There was almost games when they were sort of turning their back or, just turning over. I don't feel like that anymore. And I think we all criticise the structure above the manager and the board, but I don't think we've got the structure too far wrong from the manager down. I think, losing Joe Rawls and losing sort of that leadership group, was a really sad time for Cardiff City. But I'm also excited to see what Brian Barry Murphy sets up below that.
So I said yesterday night, actually, that leadership vacuum that's being created, right, by Callum O'Dowda, Joe Rawls, Aaron Ramsey, all leaving, plus Matty as well, who's a very experienced player. Yes, that's created like a leadership vacuum. But do you know what else it does, right? Is it gives, number one, it gives the senior players still there an opportunity to show that they can be leaders and they can have a voice in the group, whether that's a Wintle, Callum Robinson, Callum Chambers, Perry NG, or the keepers. But it also, it gives some of those younger lads a opportunity to show that they can be leaders. Maybe a Ruben or an Alex Robertson or whoever, because maybe last year, and this is, of course, is hypothetical, right? But maybe Ruben Caldwell last year, he's quite a quiet lad anyway. Maybe Ruben had something to say at some point, but then he looked around the dressing room and he sees Joe Rawls, who's been there for 10 years. He sees Aaron Ramsey, who's been there and done it. And, other experienced players, Callum O'Dowda, who's been the captain all season. And maybe he thinks, well, it's not his place to voice an opinion. Whereas now, there is a leadership vacuum. There is an opportunity for any player or players to step up and show that they are capable of guiding this group. And I said at the end of the season, this team needed new voices to lead it. It doesn't have to be new voices from the outside. It just needs new voices to lead it. Yeah, do you agree? Do you agree with that, mate? Or do you think that ultimately we've got to bring some leaders in?
No, you're absolutely right. And just going back to Ruben, I think there's two things as well. I think Ruben's always been the scapegoat only for Cardiff City. I feel like this is going to be one of the first managers that Ruben's probably played under where I think he's not going to have that criticism. I feel it's going to be that other element of it. But also what you've also got to take into consideration is because of the change, Ruben's probably one of those senior players we've got now. So as a Cardiff City fan as well, there is an expectation. He doesn't want us to be where we are. If you look at his footballing career, he doesn't want us to be where we are. And I think, we've got players that have bags of potential. Okay, they don't have the experience in numbers of games, but they've definitely got the experience of the clubs they've been at or the pedigree that they've got. So what's against having a leadership group of the Fishes, the Alwick, who has been our captain last year, the Colwells of the world, Darland. To be fair, he's had a part of his career was a captain, and decent pedigree. The Callum Robinson's been captain. Salak, just oozes being a captain. He leads by example. It's across the board, and it's all through the spine of the team. Wintel's been captain, so there is a strong leadership group there. It's just as long as they keep buying into what the manager's expectations are, they'll thrive. It's just that point if they don't.
Yeah, they got to embrace it, haven't they? Ultimately, Mark was it Mark? Someone asked, anything on Alex Robertson's state or going. So the noises, and I say this lightly because it is what it is, right? The noises coming out of the club at the moment is that the likes of Robertson, Salic, whoever, they're not for sale. Now, I think we all know historically at Cardiff City, everybody has got a price, just the way it is. That's about all I could tell you on it. I know we had a bid for him. I don't know what happened with it. I don't know if you're able to add anything to it, mate. But as far as I know, no one's for sale. But I think we all know that that's equally not true. So
the only thing I would add from a fan's perspective, it will show the club's ambition and intentions.
God, yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I'll end on this, right? I said privately, I think I said it on a show, but at the start of the summer, if we could sign Dylan Lawler to a long-term contract and keep hold of Yusuf Salic and Ruben Colwell, I think that's a very good window.
Yep.
Unfortunately, not sure how many of those three things will happen. I think we'll keep Ruben, and I hope we keep Salic. So there we go. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's been a pleasure, as always. It's flown by again. Absolutely flown by. The under-21s play tomorrow against Ammerford in the Welsh Cup, I want to say. Nathaniel MC Welsh Cup, I think it is. 2:30 kickoff at Ammerford. So that'll be interesting. Hopefully they stream that on the channel, but they're a bit hit and miss with the 21s games. But that's a big game. Like, it's a Welsh Cup game. Like, it's early doors, that is, isn't it? They should have enough quality, you'd think, wouldn't you? But who knows? Like, I'd imagine though, like teams like Ammerford and the other Welsh League teams, they will, even if they're playing against Cardiff's 21s, they'll want to, it's a big game for them, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's relevant to what player steps on that pitch is that representation of playing against a professional club, the crest, the history of Cardiff City, and everybody, irrelevant of what league cup it is, will want to beat us, won't they?
Yeah. Oh, just on that, I just read a comment which is really interesting. So it's a comment on the show from last night, but it kind of coincides with what I was saying earlier about leaders don't have to be 30; they just have to have the right personality. Ethan Ampadu, and this was sent in by D44276. But D says Ethan Ampadu is an example of that, right? Was he 22, 23, 50 Wales caps, captain of Leeds, and they just won the league last season and got promoted to the Premier League. You don't have to be 32, 30, whatever, to be a leader. You just have to have the right personality. We shall see. I think the squad needs a couple of players, but I also think people might underestimate some of the qualities in the squad because we had such a terrible season last year. You've got to remember that we've got a real good coach now. I think that makes a big difference.
Absolutely.
All right, mate. Thank you so much. And we're going to finish off with a little word from our sponsors with this little video that I made earlier. 180. I know that was bad, wasn't it? Yeah. I'm sorry, as always. Welcome. As always, got something special for you, but something a little bit different. The Village Hotel has a new multiplayer darts experience, so you can get ready for some fun. We're excited to introduce the brand new multiplayer darts experience to the pub and grill. Whether you are a pro or you're just playing for fun with friends and colleagues, it is the perfect challenge, and it is exciting games for you to enjoy. You won't miss it. Selected sites are now open and they are taking bookings already, so get ready to dart off for a game at the Village Hotel near you. Bracknell, Bristol, Cardiff, Chester, St David's, Coventry, London, Watford, Farnborough, Manchester, Cheadle, Maidstone, Portsmouth, Warrington, as well as coming soon to Manchester, Bury, Basingstoke, Leeds North, Southampton, Eastleigh and Birmingham, Dudley. The Village Hotel is bringing you something special, something unique. So get yourself down to the pub and grill for the new multiplayer dart experience. In a bit.